Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Well, I'm delighted to welcome Pete Arnott to the Talent Equation podcast. Pete, welcome.
Hi, how are you doing, Stuart?
Good to have you on. This has been a long time coming. We've tried to set this up over a number of occasions, and we have summarily failed to actually make the conversation happen. So I'm really pleased that you're able to join us. Starting point, I suppose, Pete, is I know a lot about you because I've been following your work with Graham McDowell and some of the stuff you've done on other podcasts like the Golf Science Lab with Cordy Walker. Highly recommend that to anybody who wants to go and find out more about what Pete's all about. However, tell us all about yourself and your backstory and what brought you to how you coach the way you coach.
Okay, it could be a long story. Yeah, so about 10 years ago, I used to be a project manager in IT, gave up my career about 10 years ago, went up to see Graham at Elmwood and was looking at what I was really interested in coaching, went up to see Graham McDowell at Elmwood, now SRUC, and had a conversation with him along with other golf pros and got involved with the golf pro education at Graham's College, and really just from there studied a degree in golf coaching, got involved, really shadowed Graham for quite a few years. It was quite interesting watching Graham work. I was definitely in the world of golf swing at that time, so I was personally with my own game. You know, if I reflecting, when I went up there, I thought to be a good golf coach, I needed to know all about technique. And it was quite interesting going out and a coaching, shadowing Graham in Spain, coaching, and we went out to play golf. And I was asking Graham to video my swing, and he just couldn't be less interested in doing that. And he just said, just hit the bleeping thing, right? And and just do me a favour and hit the bleeping thing. Think about nothing for the next 9 holes, and I played great golf. and something round about that time, I think it was about 2010, 11, just clicked. Like the way I'd grown up as a kid playing golf, there was 20, 30 of us playing golf every day, no coaches, playing for money every day, 36, 54 holes, highly competitive, and we all got to a decent level. And then, I don't know, I just got in this, I'm talking about my own game here, but I got in this world of technique and looking at my golf swing and getting a lot of technical coaching. I was playing pretty poor golf. And then, round about that period, spending time with Graham, he was sending me some of the skill acquisition stuff, because he was doing his, he was doing his master's degree at Birmingham at the time, so he was very much involved in that. And he sent me a Brazilian football paper written by Keith Davids and Ian Renshaw, and I think it was Duarto. I can't pronounce his name. Yeah. And it was about how the kind of Brazilian footballers in the 60s and 70s, their technique had emerged through playing on uneven surfaces, and it was just it kind of clicked. It was like, that's how I learned how to play golf. Just playing golf and just mucking about, and who can hit the biggest slice, who can hit the biggest hook. And then I really got interested in the skill acquisition stuff. Shadowed Graham for years, still do, and work with him. And kind of that's the start of my journey into skill acquisition and the kind of ecological side of things. And then finished college, managed to get a job where I played golf for years, luckily with Scott. And I'm a teaching pro now. I coach golf 40 hours a week. So it's been an interesting journey. I now I'm doing a master's as well, master's by research, longest master's in history. It's probably taken me 4 years now. It's supposed to take 2. But and I'm currently writing a book with Graham, Ian Redshaw, and Keith Davids on constraints-led approach to golf.
Fantastic.
That's kind of a short version of my story.
So, I mean, there's a lot in there. I think. I mean, one of the things that I'm really interested in is the just sort of digging into maybe the research that you're doing and the focus that you have there around the constraints-led approach to golf. I'd be interested just to sort of hear where your focus is, I suppose, and the sort of things that you're discovering and uncovering. Because I like a bit of research on the Talent Equation podcast. We are very practice driven, but we also like a bit of the theory stuff as well when we can get there. So to have somebody who's actively researching is useful to us.
Yeah, so my master's by research is basically it's come from a question Graham and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do for my master's, and it was topical at the time that the Scottish golf were not producing. We were producing highly successful amateur golfers, but on the pro side not so much, and it was a topical in the local news. So set about to kind of see if we could answer that. So I've interviewed 5 current European Tour players and 2 former European Tour players on basically constraints impinging on them on the European Tour. So some of the questions I ask is, tell me some of the things that affect performance on the European Tour. And some really interesting stuff has emerged out of that. So one of them is that they all describe and when their amateur days didn't prepare them for the European Tour, specifically the golf courses that they played in the UK. So the most successful golfer described how he was successful early as an amateur and tasted a little bit pro life, and he described that he kind of came to the realization that the competitive environment he was playing in at amateur wasn't preparing him for pro life. So he delayed turning pro for a couple of years and spent a couple of years in America on golf courses that were more representative of tour golf. And what do I mean by that? Well, the golf courses that a lot of the players play on the UK circuit are links golf courses or parkland golf courses that are short and tight. And they're nothing like the tour golf courses, which are long and mainly a little bit more wide open. And the grasses are different. Putting surfaces, that's what's come to light in Scotland purely because the weather here, so the greens are a lot slower as well. So a lot of them said that they don't even practice the putting when they come home because it's not representative of tour greens. So if you look at some of the stuff that Ross Pinder's done on cricket, that could be analogous to that. If they practice their putting here, they become attuned to greens that are very, very slow and nothing like what they're playing on tour. What else? One of the questions we ask is how often are you on your absolute A game in terms of long game in rounds per year in a round, and what's come out of that is probably like 10%. So there's the top players in the world that I'm interviewing, they're telling me that they're actually only hitting the ball great 10% of the time, which from a point of view of training when you look at a lot of these tour pros, they're trying to perfect their A game on the range all the time, and most of the time spent on their B, C, D, and E game. So a lot of the stuff that Graham and I do from a training point of view is to push them away from their A game, so that they have to find, this is elite players, of course, push them away from their A game so that they have to find something that works for them on the golf course. Every single player said to me that they've got a stock shot when they're not playing well as well. That's a shot that they feel comfortable with. And my next question to them is, have you played well with that stock shot? And not every, but a few have said that they've won tournaments with it. Yeah. And one player this week, not part of the Masters, that Graham and I spoke to, was asked that very same question. We ask it a lot to good players of, how often you're on your A game, and they came up about 10%. But interestingly, he said that I never played my best when I was hitting the ball my best, because he felt like he had too many options. So when he won twice, he said he was kind of mediocre. He was hitting the ball mediocre, but it constrained his options. So if you go back to the degrees of freedom problem, he's constraining his degrees of freedom purely, hit a certain flight, a ball flight.
It's fascinating. I never play my best when I play my best. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's not all about hitting a golf ball. It's about, what you've got on that day, and maybe you've got too many options sometimes at that level. Of course, most golfers don't.
What's interesting to me, though, is I think there's a lot in there. One of the things that I'm really interested in is, as you know, and we talked about previously, but a lot of people, I suppose, in the who listen to the podcast don't necessarily know that I've spent quite a lot of time working in golf, looking at the aspects of talent development. Started out working around children's golf, but then also looked at things like talent development, and I did something kind of similar 10, 15 years ago, which was to do not with the same rigor as your research masters, but I basically went out and did quite a lot of interviews of players who are either on tour, players who had missed out, players who were still striving, coaches, administrators, etc., etc. And one of the things that I sort of picked up from that as well, around the theme that's emerging, is the whole aspect of not being prepared for a life of elite golf. And so one of the things that became really interesting was I sort of noticed this pattern of this was English players particularly at this time, and it may be similar for Scotland, but what we saw was that they would get to a particular point in their amateur careers, which meant that they could turn pro, but then there was this enormous performance decrease, and then some of them recovered out of that. And the most famous example would be Justin Rose and his 22 missed cuts or whatever it was. Yeah, but a lot of them emerged out of that, but quite a few didn't.
Yeah.
Whereas some of the other nations, particularly America, where they tend to turn pro a little bit later, and they have obviously a collegiate career and all those sorts of things, they didn't seem to have the same sort of performance drop-off, as the profile wasn't quite the same.
Yeah. So, absolutely. And the four out of the 5 current European Tour players that I interviewed said if they hadn't gone to America, they wouldn't be on tour just now.
Really?
So, yep. Yeah. And not just from a kind of representative golf courses point of view, like teaching them life skills. One talked about being a bit of a mummy's boy, and when he left to go to America, he taught him how to live on his own and cook for himself and book flights and all these sort of things. And you hear consistently, or certainly I have, from players that have come through not just the Scottish system, European wide, where all they have to do is turn up at the airport with their passport and everything else is done for them. I had one player specifically that got him about 5-6 years later after talent development system. He'd come through a talent development system and had quite a successful amateur career. His first year as pro, he had £30,000 worth of sponsorship, but he'd been accustomed to living a life of going to Dubai, living in kind of nice hotels, and he was on the mini tours, and he basically, because he hadn't been taught these life skills, spent all that money in 6 months because he was living in nice hotels. He didn't know how to manage it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting from a, not just a golfing point of view,
The interesting thing for me, I suppose, is I look back at my time in that, and what was interesting was, at the time I was essentially working with and for, to a certain extent, Peter Madsen. I don't know if you know Peter.
I've heard of him, yes.
Yeah, he's a friend of the show, and an enormous influence on my career, and I still classify him as a friend and quite a significant mentor. Peter currently works. He was the performance director at England Golf for about 4 or 5 years, but he'd come from Sweden and worked as the kind of as the head of golf over in Sweden, and then he now currently works as he's actually heads up the Swedish Sports Confederation, which basically looks at all sports across Sweden. One of the things he brought across at the time, which was interesting, was the idea of a games-based approach to coaching in golf.
Yeah.
And this again was probably prior to the people's beginning to understand some of the research out there around ecological dynamics and non-linear pedagogy and all these sorts of things that we're interested in now. Mm-hmm. But he had this sense that, successful golfers tended to have this kind of game-like approach to the development of their game. And he tried to sort of bring that through into the coaching culture within the kind of England programs. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I've obviously been involved in other sports, and I was very interested in, games-based approach, TGFU, the designer game concept, game sense, these sorts of things. This is again, quite embryonic stages. You kind of hear the idea, but it was really interesting that at that time, I'm going back, like I said, 15 so years ago, that we were starting to embed these principles and these ideas. But the philosophy was, we're going to use this approach because we want to try and mimic the professional arena, and the focus was, he shifted the focus away from creating a great England amateur team or great England amateur players towards getting these players on the professional circuit and professional tour. Now, when I look back now and I see some of the names that are on tour, young English players that are actually having pretty damn good careers, you've got the likes of, part of that stable, part of that group were names like Eddie Pepperell, Tommy Fleetwood, Tyrrell Hatton, I'm trying to think of a couple of others now. Names will come back to me. But I'm thinking to myself, what was interesting about that particular cohort, but that particular crop, was that they made it earlier without necessarily the US collegiate option.
Yeah.
Which was, okay, this is enormously correlational, and I'm not saying that was why. But it's just an interesting reflection of mine that there was a particular period of time where the kind of the process around the England performance concept became much more, or the England performance environment became much more kind of ecological in its approach. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen emerge is some performers who seem to have progressed more readily. Again, I'm not saying that's why, but I just reflect on it and think there's something interesting in that we probably ought to look into in a bit more detail.
Absolutely. And from a games-based point of view, you've talked about this in length, but in your previous podcast, the motivational factor as well for kids when they come into golf lessons and just retaining kids, not just even the professional, like, I suppose that's a cherry on top if that happens, but just golf industry at the moment's declining in numbers. So just a parent the other day there that's a sad situation you get in sometimes, where I suppose it reflect the last 6 months I've started coaching on a driving range purely because our facilities don't have, we've just got a golf course really and an indoor facility with a simulator. And so for teaching large groups, it's very difficult. So I started teaching in the last 6 months kids on the driving range. First session I did, I had no idea what I was doing because I teach kids on the golf course all the time. Literally no idea. Like they burn through 500 balls in about 20 minutes, and I was like, Oh my God, right, what do I do? And it was really difficult as a coach, just trying to figure out, because it's easy in the golf course, you just put them under trees, give them, obstacles to come over, little games, and then the range, I'm like, what do you do? Because, and I can see from reflecting as a coach, you can see why the golf industry is so commercial now, and it's saturated with golf coaches, that, I feel myself, I coach a lot indoors over the winter purely because of the weather. Mm-hmm. And I can feel myself, I'm getting out in the last couple of weeks on the golf course, I can feel myself getting more technical just purely by being in that environment.
That's interesting, isn't it? That the environment that you're coaching within starts to make you act in a different way.
Big time. Yeah, it really does. And from a driving range kind of coaching point of view, I can see why so many players or so many coaches, that is their kind of niche, or that's the only world that they live in, because that's all they can really do.
On that kind of environmental or contextual challenge around coaching behaviour and coaching methodology, I've often thought that the very often transactional nature of golf coaching is a big part of the issue, in the sense that on tour, ordinarily, what is a tour professional kind of looking for from a coach? Usually it's something that's going to solve a problem pretty immediately, and usually there's very limited time to solve it. Hence, some form of technical input will usually kind of solve the problem, at least short term, and often create a bit of a relationship between that player and that coach if they haven't worked together before. In a recreational context, I come along to you with a bundle of cash in my pocket, and I'm expecting to get better in the limited time that we might work together. And if I don't, or I might have a problem that I want fixing, and that's why I'm coming to you in the first place. I've got a problem, I need it fixing. If I don't fix it in that time frame, chances are I might not come back to you, I'll just go somewhere else. And I think this becomes a real vicious circle, doesn't it?
Big time, yeah. See it all the time. It's managing expectations. It's the golf industry very much geared towards quick fixes. Turn on YouTube, fix your slice in 5 minutes, and tip here. Watch the golf. There's always a quick tip on that. Open a golf magazine, quick tip on how to hit a draw. It's constantly something that when I'm on the lesson tee, kind of managing expectations on. And one of the first questions I asked a new client is, are you watching any videos at the moment? Or, what's your environment like? And I can engage, I can kind of discern how long a journey it's going to be from who he's watching, and how many swing thoughts he's got. Or him or her. Yeah.
If they say a certain name or they say a certain area, then you're like, ooh, this is going to be a long job.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I'll be quite frank, 2 weeks ago I had to basically chew somebody out about it. He came to me and I run a golf coaching business, I'll be quite frank, but I've pushed and I've done the kind of quick fix for 3-4 years, not all the time, but I've only been coaching 6 years, commercially. And last year and a half I've moved my whole business model towards long-term coaching, because that's what I believe in, skill acquisition, learning wise. But it's rife in golf where just players turn up and think you can fix them within half an hour. And a lot of my clientele are guys with a little bit more cash, a little bit more free time, late 40s, early 50s. Some have got movement history that's, sitting at a desk all the time, quite a lot of rugby players or a lot of injuries,
Yeah.
And yeah, it's fascinating from a coaching point of view, but to change a slice that somebody's hit for 40 years, speak to Ed Coughlin about that. That's not how I pronounce his second name, is it? But it's like having somebody with a slice for 40 years. It's like this deep, really deep, shallow, narrow well, or a tractor well, yeah. And you've got to like dig in, yank it out, really a movement pattern that's just so far, it's just dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff, like a lot of stuff I'll do is technical stuff, yeah, but it's more aligned to skill acquisition stuff. It's like feels, and it's not positions based. It's just like I'll give somebody a football and throw a football against the wall. How does that feel? Okay, right. Let's see if you can move that way in the golf swing.
Yeah.
It's not the internal versus external debate. I'm not sold on that. 3 years ago, I would have, if somebody had come in with an internal thought, I would have given them chapter and verse on, oh no, you've got to be external, da 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 da. It's like if I put a tree in front of somebody, and it's happened before, if I put a tree in front of somebody and say, fade it round that tree, they start fading it round that tree, and I ask them, what does that feel like? Oh, well, my left hip's doing this. What do I say to them? No, you shouldn't be thinking that. It's a successful outcome.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of examples of guys that have won multiple majors with internal thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? So Gabi Wolfs' research on internal versus external focuses of attention.
Yeah.
You're referring to there, yeah. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, for those people who aren't as aware of this as others, is her research, I think, and by all means correct me if I go in the wrong place here, but her research is focused around the idea that when performers are focused internally on their movement mechanics, they generally speaking move less effectively than or perform tasks less effectively than people who are focused away from the body, either at a target, which is some distance away, or maybe at something more proximal, like in our case, maybe a golf club or something along those lines. Is that a fairly decent summary?
Absolutely. Yeah. And from a practical point of view, like I always, when I'm looking at research, I'm like, well, where was it done? Who was it done by? And, what are the other influences? So, like, a lot of, I think Gabi Wolfs stuff's brilliant, but a lot of it's done with non-elite players, and if they are elite, they're not really elite.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense, because elite players are hard to get.
Yeah.
And in a kind of controlled environment.
Yeah.
So how representative is that of golf? Well, I don't know. But I think there's a lot of really good stuff in there. I'm just not sold it's black and white.
I think though where it kind of chimes for me, and I sort of get this, is I think in the learning space, i.e. in the learning phase, when you're exploring and you're in deep exploration around how your body moves to perform a certain task. Yeah. So, I don't think you can help but have at least some awareness of what the body is doing, or what the implement that you're using is doing. Because without the awareness of that, I don't think you're fully immersed in learning how you can perform a certain task. Whereas I think in a performance context, and often her research is focused on the performance of certain tasks, isn't it? Mm-hmm. In a performance context, I sort of think the idea of making your focus less around the movement and more towards the outcome makes some sense. And that sort of goes back to Tim Galway's stuff around the inner game, which is, he talks about self 1, self 2, doesn't he? And he sort of says, self 2 is the one that will, I think it's self 2, is the one that will protect you. So, that's the one that kind of shuts things down in order to stop you from doing something strange or hurting yourself. Whereas self one, the other way around, isn't it? It's self one that does that. Self two is a rational. Self one's the rational brain that stops you doing the crazy things. Self two's the stuff that actually just does it. Yeah. And if you can free yourself from your controlling brain and allow the other brain, the other side of the brain, or let the self two to just release itself, you generally find yourself being more successful. Sort of get that. You don't want to get in your own way, do you?
Yeah.
But I take your point. I think your point is an absolutely valid one. I think in the learning space, I'm not sure that necessarily applies as readily, or at least we should research that in more depth.
Even performance, like Nick Faldo won the Masters in 96, saying with an internal thought when he was putting, he felt like his right hand was going towards the target. Yeah. McIlroy's talked about, I think it was his right heel when he was playing in the Masters. He was thinking about moving his weight in his right heel. No, I think it's a lot. Again, it's a case study of one, stealing Mark Bull's comment. So, I think it really depends on skill level, that individual in front of you. But what else? I really do not think it's black and white. I think, and sometimes even when I suppose I'm going to a technical side here, but sometimes when you're teaching somebody and you ask them how that feels, well, sometimes not the best question to ask because they might not be able to tell you, or they might internalize their thoughts when they do that.
Yeah. So from the perspective of your approach, you mentioned earlier on, it's something piqued my interest as well, is that you've shifted your entire business model towards long-term development.
Yeah.
Well, first question I've got there is, has that had a commercial impact?
Yeah, massively so, yes. I've never been busier.
So a positive one?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right, so talk me through the process, because one of the things I hear a lot is, and this is coaches in all walks of life, by the way, not just golf, and also contexts which aren't necessarily commercially driven, is how quite a lot of coaches have come under a bit of a challenge to, I suppose, their coaching is seen as atypical, in the sense that it's not what people kind of expect. They expect instruction, they expect technical information, they expect lots of other things. As a result, some coaches are finding themselves in either this kind of constant justification mode to explain people. So the fact that you've bucked that trend, if you like, and you haven't seen kind of like a client base walk away from you because they expected something different. I'd be interested just to sort of get some information about, because I think it'll help other coaches who are constantly struggling with this.
I think just from sell it as anything else, not sell it, but like anything else you get better at life, you spend a lot of time doing it. You get good at your job. It didn't take a couple of hours to do, did it? It's years of failure and a little bit of guidance there, or a mentor there, or courses that you do, and so I think a lot of people get that when you sell it that way. It's like, and the way I model it, I suppose, is just like, I suppose if you go for music or any other domain, it's continuous, isn't it? It's so. And from how I coach in that, it really depends on the individual. There is some technical work in there, but a lot of stuff I spend on the golf course. I use Edify a lot with players, and inform their practice. All this kind of skill acquisition stuff of what, even if they're going up the range, just I'll spend an hour with them on how they can use their best time if they're going at the range. It's just the nature of Scotland in the winter is that you're probably not, most people are working, so they'll maybe get one game of golf a week. So it's better going to the range during the week and actually hitting golf balls in a non-representative environment. But it's better hitting balls than not. But if they're going to hit balls, then informing how they can hit golf balls, and from a learning point of view, what to do. If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, it does. But I think it might be useful to sort of illustrate that a little bit. So, for example, if I was working with you and I was in that context, and I've got limited time, definitely got limited time, and I might be able to get out once a week for some time on the range. Likelihood is I'm not going to get onto the golf course. How would you approach? I know a lot of this depends, obviously. I'll give you. Okay, here's the background. 7 handicapper. Was a 12 for years. Had a bit of a breakthrough. 7 handicapper. Played cricket, played hockey. Ball goes from left to right. Very well. Very, very good at that. Not very good at making the ball do anything else. But anyway, so long story short, so that's a little bit brief bio. So how would you guide my practice in that context? What sort of things would you have somebody do in their practice time that would help them develop, I guess, more of a representative practice experience and a learning experience versus the standard hit and rake concept that most people do?
Absolutely. It's really simple things. First and foremost, get the basketballs as far away from you as you can, so you're not just scraping and hitting the ball. Right?
So literally that simple. Just put the basket away from you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Makes sense.
Changing golf clubs, it depends what you're working on, you're doing, but at your level, probably shaping the ball. Yeah, a lot of shape work. Specifically, pick a target each time. And watch what the ball does. That's really important. So attune yourself to the target and how the ball's landing, because that's what happens in the golf course. Mix up the golf clubs that you're hitting. If you feel like you're getting in a rhythm on the range, go and have a coffee for 20 minutes, 10 minutes, because you don't get in a rhythm on the golf course. It's like 2-3 minutes after every shot, unless you've hit a terrible shot. I'm trying to think about it. Player dependent. What else could you do? A lot of the practice around. I wrote a blog about this, about a guy that I had who basically every round we were working a little bit on technically, he moved the ball too much right to left, and on the golf course it took him about 6-7 holes to get into hitting the ball straight. So we did a little constraints game where every ball at the start of his range session he hit left of a target with his driver, he had to give 5 balls to the guy next to him, and just little things. Again, it's unique to the individual who you're with. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
No. I mean, it's funny because you've made me think about kind of the time. Quite often I'll go up to the golf range with my 2 kids. I've got a 10-year-old boy and a 6-year-old daughter who are well known to the show, and we all play a little game where Isla has a little target ahead of her that's usually 2 markers or whatever it might be. And Evan has one a bit further away, and I have one further away, depending on what club we're using. And then we all go in turns, which obviously means that we have a bit of time to think between each one. And it's like, so Isla will go first, and if she gets her ball through, then Evan goes, and if he gets, and then we either have a points game or we'll have like a sudden death game where if one person gets it through, the first person gets it through, then the next one has to get it through, otherwise they have to do a forfeit or whatever it is. And we play those kinds of games on the range all the time, just because it just focuses what we're trying to achieve a little bit. But I'm not telling them anything. I'm not going to give them anything kind of technical at this stage, because I just want them to have fun. But what's interesting is they love it. They love playing that kind of game, and they always ask to play it as opposed to anything else. Absolutely.
And there's a game I've stolen off Thomas Devine, a golf coach based down in Leeds, I think, where it's a grid of 5 balls by 5 you put on the range mat, and it's like there's a penalty each time. If you hit another ball, there's a penalty each time. You lose a life, basically. Right? It's the penalty each time you hit another ball. But you have to become adaptable to that, because you can play it against head-to-head against each other, and the opponent picks what ball you hit. So it can be, you've got an awkward stance.
Right.
I'll send it across to you. But it's a brilliant little game where you have to be a little bit more adaptable. But even just simple things like a lot of like hitting off towels or uneven surfaces, or right foot on a kind of exercise bosu ball. Just a little bit of instability there.
Yeah. Now, I know that it was a really unfair question, that, because that is not your natural environment to coach within. Your natural environment to coach within is within the context, i.e. on the golf course. And
very much so.
Interestingly, so I said to you earlier I was a 12 handicap for a long time. It was I made a massive progress I went from 12 to about 9 or 8 very quickly, and it was largely because, having never broken 80 before on my golf course, I then broke 70 twice in 2 weeks. And coincidentally, probably not coincidentally, probably very specifically, it coincided with me spending 2 hours with the golf pro at my club, going to a conference, then playing 18 holes with him as my partner, and then having 2 hours in the car on the way back where he talked to me a little bit about my game.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, all of a sudden, some performance unlocked in me, and I played golf that I never thought I was capable of.
Yeah.
And I was one of those people, this is going back, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, who, as a coach, very technically driven, wanted to learn a lot about the game, thought I knew a lot about the game, thought I knew a lot about it technically. And it just took that conversation to unlock my performance. So you, in your context, how would it differ? When you're given the freedom of working in a much more constraints-led approach, what sort of experience might we have?
It's very much just, again, depends on the individual and what level they're at. But I suppose this morning, coaching a young pro, we've done a little bit of technical work. He's hitting the ball pretty good. Out on the golf course, watched him hit a few tee shots. And again, reflecting, because I spent about 3 months in the indoor area, I was close to saying let's hit a few more balls, but then I thought, no, let's do a game. Let's put you under a little bit of pressure. So he had 5 balls on a particularly tough hole that he didn't like the look of, and if he scored 20 for the 5 balls, there was no forfeit. Under 20, I had to do a forfeit, and over 20, he had to do a forfeit. And we played 2 balls, 2 and 2, and then 1 ball. And just watching what he did under a little bit of pressure. We stopped at one point because it was an uneven lie, and he really struggled with it. So I just kind of guided him through the options that he could do. He was hitting, he struggled with it, and basically told him to go on his golf course and hit a load of balls off that uneven line, kind of figure it out himself a little bit, which you would never see on a driving range. And just put him under a little bit kind of pressure, I suppose, in practice. And
so the power of that for me, just listening to that story, and I'm going to talk about another one that I heard you mention on Cordy's podcast as well, which we must talk about. But the power of that for me is that what you're doing is you're using the performance environment to then determine what the problem that needs to be solved is.
Yeah.
And then from there, you're able to then devise the constraint that you're going to apply, or whatever it is, in order to help that individual with the problem that they need to solve. Yeah. It very rarely works like that. In my experiences of working within the industry, ordinarily what happens is, you rock up on the range, and somebody has a conversation with you, and the conversation is, what normally happens with your game. And you normally say these things, and what would you like to get out of it? I'd like to get this thing fixed, if you like. Then usually there's an observation period of balls being hit. And from that observation period, usually then we embark on some form of technical intervention. That's been my experience. As opposed to, in that case, I imagine that the performer wasn't even necessarily aware that was a problem that they had. They probably would have thought that their problem was something else.
Absolutely. Yeah, I see that. A classic example of that is once, I could tell you about a million stories, but because we've got the indoor area and sometimes the golf course is too busy, I had Johnny last year indoor for the first hour of a 2-hour lesson, hitting the ball great indoors, Go to the second hole. It's quite an uphill hole. Hits an okay drive. He's got a 9-iron in off an uphill slope. Duffs it. Hits another one, duffs it again. Hits another one, duffs it again. He's like, it's my golf swing. He's going golf swing, and it was nothing to do with his golf swing. It's how he set up to it on that shot. He's not hit one bad shot in the indoor area.
Yeah.
And
so he sort of constrained himself by virtue of the fact of the way he began the process.
Yeah, and the world that many golfers live in, when they hit a bad shot, they think it's their golf swing, where most of the time it's not. It's another lesson that I did this week on the golf course, where Phil's stuck behind a tree, and brilliant. He's so focused on the lie that he's got, he doesn't like the lie, but then chooses a club that he's got trees to come through, and he had the option of basically massive gap under the trees or massive gap over the trees. He chooses a club that he's got no gaps because the overhanging branches are. So great, we spent about 20 minutes, 30 minutes exploring that shot and his options. You just don't get that on a driving range.
And as a result of that, so in terms of the exploration of that particular shot, what did you discover, or what did he discover?
Basically, he could hit it over or under, but for him it was easier to hit under the tree.
Uh-huh. And he wouldn't have had that shot before.
No. But again, he didn't understand as much the trajectory of what the club was going to do. He wasn't really thinking in that space. But I was like, look at what that club's, look at what's it's affording you, shall we say?
Yes.
And it was the wrong option at the time, but I didn't tell him that. We just explored it. Like, how can you hit? Show me some different ways you could play that shot, and just explored it. Hit the tree loads of times, and just let him fail loads of times, and ask him lots of questions. I think to me that when I'm coaching at a golf course, I'm not very little. I've got preconceived ideas of what's going to happen. It's just waiting for the coachable moment, and there's always coachable moments.
You've just made me think of something that was something that just jumped out at me when I listened to Rudy Duran, Tiger Woods' coach.
Yeah.
And he said to me, I just play golf with Tiger on a Saturday morning. We play 18 holes on the par 3 course, and I just wait for the coachable moments.
Yeah.
And I went up and asked him, and I said, how many times did how much time did you spend on the range with Tiger versus on the course? He'd say 85, 90% of times on the course.
Yeah.
He said, if we went on the range, it was only because Tiger discovered a problem. We're talking about a 5-year-old, 6-year-old kid now, 7-year-old kid. And I said, because he discovered a problem on the course that he couldn't solve there, so he'd use the range with me to find a way of solving the problem.
Yeah.
And it's like, for me, that's the power of this, is the sense that, you're working backward from the problem to discover then what the available solutions are. Whereas so much of golf coaching tends to be is there is already a solution pre-prescribed based on a aesthetic model that everybody has, technical aesthetic model.
Absolutely.
And the way of developing is to get people to fit that model as close as possible, or give them, ensure that they meet these sort of pre-prescribed biomechanical movement patterns, because those pre-prescribed biomechanical movement patterns have been shown over the years to be more suitable than others. And for me, that's a completely flawed idea. What you're saying is actually there's loads of ways of solving this problem. Let's work them out.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And that's not to say some of the stuff in the biomechanics isn't useful.
No.
But yeah, absolutely. There's many ways to solve a problem, and there's quite a few players recently that I've spoken to that at a reasonable level, and that the coaches have a preconceived idea of how the player moves, but they've never asked them how they see the world. Like, what, if somebody's shaped the ball left to right, this is more about your affordances and your action capabilities. Somebody's shaped the ball left to right for 20 years, and you start getting them move it the other way, all hell can break loose.
Yeah.
Because they've seen the world for 20 years left or right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm right at the edge of that myself. I mean,
Yeah.
I can now make the ball go, 90 degrees from right to left, kind of when I want to, but it's still really weird.
Yeah, because when you get on a golf course, you've not seen the golf ball do that for X amount of years.
Yeah, or I've usually associated it with something that's really undesirable. So I've got quite a lot of, inbuilt sort of, emotional baggage attached with the ball disappearing that way.
And coaching in context, if I do have any preconceived ways of coaching on the golf course, I'll ask the player holes that they don't like the look of, so, and then we'll try and recreate it on the golf course that I coach on, and then explore it. Because
the interesting thing about that was I've been having a discussion with Lauren Anderson on Twitter recently. Lauren's a volleyball coach, and he's been talking to me about intent. And interestingly, the approach that someone takes or the decision they make in the performance environment to achieve a particular outcome, the decision they make is usually and needs to be, I would say, based on what their intent is. So and their intent is often driven by, for example, like you say, emotional baggage or what they see, what they're aware of. I actually think it's really important to become aware of what people are perceiving in order to then help them devise a potential solution. So like for me, I quite often will see a shot in a certain way. And that was one of the things that Tony, who the previous guy was telling you about, who we played together, he said to me afterwards, he said, why do you play that shot that way? And I said, because I'm fearful of other outcomes. And he goes, but you're better than that. You can do that. I mean, I'm shortcutting the actual conversation. But that was an unlocking moment for me, because it made me realise that I actually had a series of limiting beliefs.
Yeah. And that obviously affects your movement and your decision making.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. And that can be in your favour though sometimes too, though, because you can come up with solutions on holes or things that you don't like the look of. What do I mean by that? I'll reflect back on my own learning. There's a whole our course. It's called on the 16th that doesn't afford the cheapest shot I hit right to left.
Yeah.
So one Saturday evening years ago, I just got a bucket of balls and try to hit fades off the pond, and I can do it in context now. And that's a story that I've heard from Tiger, where I think it's maybe Rudy Durant told this story, where when he struggled with a shot on the golf course, he would either hit a load of balls in context there and then, or he'd go out and find it on the golf course when the course was quieter later. Yeah, and I think that that exploratory behaviour.
But the difference being is it's always coming back from the problem that needs to be solved in the context.
So if you and you talk about that, and Graham McDowell went to, I think it was a seminar Jim Furyk did at St Andrews a few years ago, and Jim Furyk talked about when he was playing poorly, he would just go out in his home course and figure out a way how to score, right? And he would eventually get a feel for his golf swing, and once he got that feel, he would go to the range and play about with it. So he would do it in context first, then take it to the range. Now that's something that's come out of my masters, where every single one of them said the range is just pretty much useless sometimes, because you're on it and you're hitting the ball great, and then you go out and shoot 77. You're like, where did that come from? Or one guy talked to me, he said, I was nearly going to walk in. I was hitting it that bad in the range. It was like he could barely hit the golf ball, and then he went out and won the tournament.
You just reminded me of something I wanted to come back to earlier on, which was I think I heard you talk on Cordy's podcast about how it was either you or Graham working with a player who was struggling to score. So what that meant was I think they were playing all right, but they weren't They weren't like, making the birdies they were looking for. And
Yeah.
your solution to that problem was you said to them, right, go out and you play and you don't come in until you're 10 under. Is that right? Is that the story?
Yeah, spot on. You put them off forward tees. You would simplify the task as well. Sometimes you would find their level at that current stage and then work it back from there. Yeah, absolutely. You just stay out on the golf course until you figure it out.
Which is, in many respects, is quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because it sort of generates its own pressure, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I remember, but it's just an interesting way of, so for those people who are, out there working in different contexts, I've thought about that and I've used that actually, interestingly, when I'm coaching hockey, for example, where I'll say, right, when what is it we might achieve here? So let's imagine it's about scoring loads of goals, right?
Yeah.
I'll say to them, right, in this game we're going to have, let's say we have 50 goes at this. How many goals ought we to score in 50 goes? And they might say, I don't know, 25.
Yeah.
Okay. The session finishes when we achieve that. So, like, for example, they could achieve it with 25 minutes to go. Done. Let's go in.
Yeah.
As opposed to like what we always used to do is, I've got an hour and a half of a session here. I've got to fill it up with stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, it rarely works that way, I have to say. It maybe happened once or twice in my entire coaching career.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's an interesting use of time or, length of time as a means as a constraint that I don't always use enough, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Time's a massive one, and for golf and training as well, where we continually see if you do like kind of constraints games that last over half an hour or an hour, the lesser performer doing okay. Sometimes they're leading, but then if you scale it out over 2-3 hours, if we've designed the game properly, which isn't always the case, the top performer emerges. Top performers emerge out of it.
Because they have greater degrees of skill over a period of time.
Absolutely, which is golf. Like if I play you over 2 holes, Stu, you've got a far better chance of beating me than 18.
Oh, don't be fooled, Peter. It's pretty. my game's pretty rough at the moment, but anyway, go on.
but you know what I mean, yeah.
I do.
It's the same with football. If Real Madrid played my home football team, Heart of Midlothian, we'd have a chance, very little, but over 5 minutes.
Yeah.
90 minutes would get destroyed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if just to kind of diverse a little bit, a lot of the games that Graham and I have done over the years, constraints games, to me it's all about how simple can you make a game, like the simplest rule. So if you think about getting to 10 under, what's emerging out of that? Well, fatigue potentially, having to concentrate for long periods of time, which they do in golf. It's representative. And I'll just talk you through a story of a game that I've developed recently where it's been very icy up here, a lot of frost, and I'd kids, kind of adolescents out in December, 8 of them on a par 3 golf course, and it was frozen. And a lot of them shoot for the reasonable players, low handicappers, and a lot of them, decision making is quite poor. They shoot for the flag all the time. But when the green was frozen, they really, really had to think about where they hit it, as in what part of where they missed the green. Because if they missed the green on the wrong side of the flag, they had no room to work with, and it was a frozen green. They just couldn't get to the flag, right? Which is analogous to decision making on the golf course, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, there's got to be a game in this. There really has to be a game. And then a couple of weeks ago, I'm out doing a playing lesson, low handicapper who basically just likes to compete against me for money, and we wait for coachable moments, and I'm quite happy to do that.
Especially when those coachable moments require him to give you some readies, I suppose.
Exactly. And yeah, so I'm actually playing golf, and I'm like, it's frozen greens, and I'm like, having to figure out, where can I best miss this green? Because it was like a trampoline when you hit the green sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
And how can I adapt this to a game? And it was kind of a light bulb moment where I was like, if I force the players to or adapt a game round where they only got a 5-iron to chip with, right, they're really going to have to think about where they are hitting it. Yeah?
Yeah.
And it comes back to the research I've done, my master's research, where every single player that I talked about when they're not on their A game, it's again, they get forward into his action capabilities, where they didn't go for as many flags. But when they were playing well, they did. They were far more aggressive. So again, some really interesting conversations when you're on the golf course, where you play that game, where, the players got to get attuned to what they've got in the day.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I'm so convinced. I mean, one of the reasons for Tiger's longevity, and, he was famous for not missing cuts, ever, hardly ever, for a long period of time. And I'm convinced that that's largely to do with his early upbringing, which was based around, he learnt to play the game of golf before he learnt how to do the techniques of golf.
Totally agree. 100% agree. And he's very adaptable, and from all reports that I've heard, when he's on the range, or historically when he was on the range, it was all just really playful games, shaping the ball and see how much he could shape it. And yeah,
it's interesting. You've just made me think about, actually, talking about pressure and games to play. I mean, and actually talking about challenges and kind of creating a pressure. I once worked with, so I did my PGA qualifications as a kind of like a volunteer coach, an amateur coach, did the level 2 some time ago. The interesting thing about that, by the way, was I learned everything there was to know about, obviously, ball flights and impact factors and all those sorts of things.
Yep.
And my game was never worse. I knew exactly why I was pulling it left into the bunder, but could do nothing about it.
Exactly.
But anyway, so after this, I was sort of, and I still do quite a little bit of golf coaching here and there with various people. But I started working with this guy at the club who was a +2 handicapper who was starting to work on the mini tours, and some of the, and trying to sort of forge a bit of a career for himself. And he was really struggling, like most of them do, because obviously it's quite a big jump, for somebody taking their first steps. So there I am, 7 handicap, and he's a +2, and we're working quite a bit on the par 3 course, doing quite a lot of short game stuff. So we did a bit of classic sort of game of like par 18, get the ball up and down from different positions. And then that identified how he thought about playing certain shots. So we started to explore different ways. But anyway, what was interesting was, and when we talked about putting the pressure on, so I would say, right, if you win this, we're going to play a game. If you win against me, then there's no cost to this session.
Yeah.
But if you lose, then you have to pay me. And in that context, he'd actually usually do quite well, because it was always there's just gain for him there. Yeah. So when I flipped it, and I've lost a few times, which I kind of should do, shouldn't I? And then I lost a few times, and then so I flipped it and said, okay, you're getting good at this now. So here, well, let's take it to a new level. So this time, if you win, it's free, but if you lose, it's double. You should have seen the wheels come off.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And just interesting playing, and I had a similar experience which I blogged about some time ago, playing with my little boy, for a Twix. And God, the power of the Twix, he just lost his mind, because up to that point it'd all been about gain. Beat your dad, you get a Twix. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Lose, but you don't get it. Oh, hang on a second. And
yeah, absolutely. No, and the only thing, reflecting over the last 5-6 years, well, longer than that, if I count the stuff that did Graham when I was a student, with the kind of constraints, games-based stuff, is a really interesting conversation with Mark Upton, October last year, and we definitely spent most of my time with players in that environment where it's kind of consequences and quite a kind of pressured training environment, and I'm sure that that's not the way to go about it, as in from a point of view of creativity and letting players kind of find their own solutions sometimes, because if you put pressure on somebody through consequences that are relevant to them, then they're just going to do what they know.
Yeah.
And not look for other solutions. So that's definitely something I reflect on. That I've probably been too harsh on that front.
Well, it's like anything, though, isn't it? Around it depends on what the purpose is. So, for example, I think the closer somebody is to going out to perform.
Yeah.
When you're in the learning phase, I totally agree with you, and it goes back to what they talk about, the form of life and things like that, doesn't it? So my role as a coach, if my role is we are in a learning phase, so like when I'm a talent development coach, there's no competition coming up. We're just here to develop your skill, and we're going to explore we're going to use lots of different approaches to help you develop your skill. Then I think once you start to layer consequences on, then you can potentially have a deleterious effect to that. But that's not to say you can't use consequences, because of course, in order to really start to see whether something is skillful, you have to somehow at least simulate the performance experience to see whether it's still holding up. I think we can sometimes fool ourselves that because somebody can do something under relatively minor pressure with low variability, that's then going to hold up in the performance environment. But I take your point. I think you're absolutely right. If you want creativity, layering on consequences will do the absolute reverse.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Again, it's context dependent, and but it's just something I've reflected on that probably have not spent enough time with players in the kind of playful environment.
Did you see? Was that largely though because you were often working with? At this point, you were working with aspiring tour professionals, and so one.
I suppose elite players. Yeah, but then definitely, and the games-based stuff that we've done, reflecting. I remember taking a load of, from a commercial point of view, about 12, 10 to 20 handicappers, and putting loads of constraints on them in the golf course, and it's like it just failed so badly. It was untrue. It was a horrendous session, and reflecting on it, it's like, well, for most of these guys, the constraint is the golf course.
Yeah. There's enough going on.
Exactly. Sorry, I'm off track a little bit there. But,
no, it's perfect. It's perfectly on track, because I think it's an important point that quite a lot of coaches are struggling with, and I'm still on the learning phase here. I think we all are, aren't we? And it's only through the sharing of these experiences. One of the reasons the podcast exists, that sharing of these experiences, that we can help to get better. I mean, I definitely, I'm exactly the same. We're talking about different contexts, but I've thrown consequences at people, not consequences. I've thrown constraints. There's times when I've had sessions where it's been like a constraint fest.
Yeah.
Let's do this, let's do that, let's do the other, and you lose sight completely. I think the players even lose sight of what it is they're supposed to be doing. And some of my most successful approaches have been when I've gone, there's one game, there's one problem it's presenting to you, and I might manipulate the task ever so slightly every now and again, maybe to give you more or less of a clue of what the problem is here. Let's explore and get underneath what that problem is. That's been some of my best coaching ever.
100%, and it's something that Graham and I did coach education last year, and we always do with the coach education. We always try and get players involved and run an actual session so that the coaches can see what's going on. And a few coaches said, well, the games are so simple. And it's like, well, they are, out of the back of them being complicated, very complicated. And then, the feedback from the players asking lots of questions, you can see they're confused. And, and as a coach, you refine them, and so much of it's failure. It's just, and having players there that are open to give you honest feedback with them as well.
Yeah, I was thinking, when you were saying about the when you would do this layered on pressure environment with elite tour players, I can imagine from the perspective of identifying with them problems to solve, you kind of have to do that a little bit, don't you? Because otherwise, these are skilled players that, unless you create that kind of environment, the problem probably won't emerge as readily, because they're all perfectly capable of performing within the context that you'll create. Without taking it up a notch in terms of difficulty, you probably can't begin to understand the limitations that they might face.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it comes back to what I said earlier on about pushing them away from their A game. Making them uncomfortable. Doing it over a period of time where they've got to be concentrated and fatigued. And one of the ones that Graham does I don't know if he's done it recently, but he's put his college kids basically in the gym and got the heart rate up for half an hour, and got them tired before they do a constraint session, so that they can feel fatigued.
Yeah.
And how does that affect their decision making when they're fatigued? Because that's the kind of world that you're going to live in. And when you go back to amateur and pro golf, so one of the guys that said to me, he was in the Scotland squad, and he said we flew so early as an amateur. So he flew like 2 weeks early. So he was acclimatized to Australia. So he was acclimatized to the golf course, the conditions, very comfortable when he came to the tournament. But he said the first year I was in Australia, Perth, flight was delayed. I was down the pecking order on the European tour, so I didn't get even a practice route. So the two don't align.
Yeah. Yeah.
You talked about another podcast as well, where there was not England golf where they were complaining about not playing well in a tournament, but because the weather conditions were poor, but they never trained in poor weather conditions. So it's not rocket science, is it?
No. I mean, but it's fascinating how commonplace this is in quite a lot of performance environments or talent development environments. How, particularly facilities, they talk about necessity is the mother of invention. Well, I actually think most of our facilities now in a lot of the sports that we're operating within now, the facilities have actually meant that we've lost sight of some of these performance variables. And that was in a classic example. We never went out and trained in the rain. Why? Because we had a covered range to work in, and we had simulators, and we had an indoor space, and we never had to.
Yeah.
And it's almost like that you're missing out on an important performance variable.
Absolutely, and I think it's there's a lot, and there's a lot of really, really good golf coaches that teach at driving ranges. But if you look at some of the talent development stuff, a lot of it's based around, I think it's changing slightly now, but based around driving range, groups of 10, 12 kids that go to a driving range every month,
Yeah.
And, so what are you going to do there? You're going to do golf swings. So I've had a few players that have come out of that, and, they've had 5-6 coaches in 7 years, and yeah, the one kid that had 16 swing thoughts. I'm not even joking. It's like, whew, because that's the environment he was subjected to, I suppose. But there is a lot of good golf coaches. It's just there's so much more to golf.
Yeah.
Than hitting a golf ball.
I think that's why, for me, one of the frustrations I had in my time working there was I used to watch. I think kids in golf in particular have a real hard time. It's the same in a lot of sports, but you might if you're lucky, you might have somebody within the club that you have grown up in who has coached you, who is considered to be your, in inverted commas, home coach. And if you're lucky enough to have the means, you can have a fairly regular engagement with that person. And if you're lucky that they're the right person, then you may be doing okay. The reality is it's often a parent and quite a lot of good players have got parents who were either good players or whatever it might be. But anyway, anyway. So people with the means have got this regular engagement with somebody who can help them with their performance.
Yeah.
And then they go into the county or whatever it might be, and there's someone else with a different thought, pattern, opinion. Then they might get to the national or the regional, and there's someone else. And I think that's one of the reasons it was such a focus of Peter's, which is to say is we're not going to touch the technique in our environment. But I have to say, I'm not sure that necessarily was true. But the idea is we shouldn't be touching their technique. What we should be doing here is create an environment which is either depending on the stage of the season, about learning and helping them become aware of performance limiters, rate limiters, or we're going to create an environment which has so much challenge and difficulty that it creates opportunities for them to be coached, or to explore ways of solving problems. But I think that in lots of cases that isn't necessarily how things work.
Yeah, just thinking about what he was trying to do there, that would be obviously very difficult if somebody's coached 10, 20 years on a driving range, and then you tell them to go and get golf coaching or a games-based approach or on a golf course. Well, that's a skill in itself, coaching on the golf course. So, I don't know. Yeah, just off the top of my head, they would need experience of actually coaching the golf course as well.
Do you know what? That was definitely an experience we had. So I was managing the regional program, and we were tapping into a program called the Advanced Apprenticeship in Sporting Excellence.
Yeah.
And it enabled us to access funding, and we could put these kids on essentially a performance development program. But within that, there was a lot of dimensions. So it wasn't just about a technical development. It was about, obviously tactical development as well as, because the framework was written for other sports as well.
Yeah.
But it also required the performer to have really sound understanding of what it was they were trying to do, and they had to be able to articulate that as part of their apprenticeship. And we just didn't have the coaches who could do that. We had excellent, we had some people who were very good, what you might call technical instructors or technical consultants.
Yeah.
So if you needed that technical intervention, they could help you. But what they couldn't do was help the performer articulate or understand their technical, what it was that they were trying to achieve. And when it came to the rest of it, the psych and the tactical and everything else, well, that was just non-existent. So what we found was we had to kind of pair them up with another coach who might be less technically adept, but by the fact that less technically knowledgeable.
Yeah.
But by the fact that they were less technically knowledgeable, it actually meant that they were more focused on some of the other performance variables.
Yeah.
We just didn't have the coaches who could do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, it comes back to what I just said. If you're not coaching on the golf course, then what are you going to be doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. You won't have the skill set. Just
And it is, and that's the other thing is it is. I mean, and I would say this, wouldn't I? Because I'm working in it, and so I'm going to stand here and pat myself and pat you on the back. But that is something that people do need to consider: is there is a high degree of difficulty and skill in working in this way.
100%. And again, it's the facilities. Again, it comes back to commercialisation of golf coaching. I wouldn't be talking to you just now if it wasn't commercialised. So, but I've just turned down a reasonable job at a driving range because it doesn't have a golf course. No chat. I'm not teaching on a range. It's just not. No, I'm quite happy to do that at certain stages, but I need a golf course to teach players.
Well, I think we could go on. However, I know that I've got two youngsters who'll come bounding through the door from school any minute now. And I know you've probably got some individuals that you will be in a constraints-led arm wrestle with on the golf course fairly shortly, I imagine.
No, I've got a 3 and a 4-year-old to pick up.
There you go. This a significant increase. So constraints-led parenting instead.
Absolutely.
It's amazing where this methodology applies itself in lots of different contexts.
Absolutely.
So Pete, look, I mean, I was reading. We haven't talked about it, but we will at a future date. I was reading your blog post series on degrees of freedom the other day with great interest. Thought it was really, really interesting. You are pretty prolific online in lots of different ways. So if people want to find out more about what you do and more about your methodologies, and even indeed want to free themselves from the shackles of the technical destructive technical world that they might have mired themselves within, and they're desperate and they want to reach out for some help, how can they get hold of you and where can they find you?
I spend a lot of time on Twitter, Peter Arnott Golf, peterarnottgolf.com, or just go in there and get my contact details. Happy to chat to anybody. Thank you for having me, Shane.
Hey, no, look, I love the fact that you've been able to get on. It's been, like I said, it's been a long time coming. Ever since it was about a year ago, I heard you on the Golf Science Lab, you and Graham, and lots of your stuff was just like, I was literally driving along, listening to the podcast, going, yes, exactly, yes, and having to pull over to make notes and stuff. So I thought, no, you got to get you on, and have this kind of conversation. And thank you for being so honest and sharing your experiences with the Talent Equation listeners. So look, it'd be fantastic to do this again. I say this a lot, but I've had quite a few repeat visitors, and I think there's always something else we could talk about. But in the meantime, all the best, and I look forward to some slightly better weather for you.
Cheers.
Cheers. So there you have it. Great conversation with Pete there. We actually ended up chatting quite a little while after we finished recording about lots of stuff. And there's every chance that if you're interested in the conversation, then I'll put some of the conversation that we had afterwards, a little 15-minute conversation where we get into some even more deep stuff. I'll put that into the members section onto my website. So if you're interested, you'll be able to get hold of it there. Sign up there on the talentequation.co.uk, and you'll be able to get hold of that sort of stuff. As always, this kind of information I'm going to provide and make available to people who are supporters of the podcast. You can become a supporter for the equivalent of buying me a cup of coffee. If you're interested, go to the website. You'll see the Patreon button. Your support will be very greatly appreciated. Help keep the lights on and meet some of the running costs of making this whole enterprise happen, which is, as it gets more sophisticated, becoming more increasingly demanding financially and from a time perspective. In the meantime, hope you enjoyed today's episode. Look forward to hearing from you next week and speak to you again soon.